Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another week of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. I'm going to kick it over first this week to our regular panelist, Spartan Grown.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you, everybody. Hello, everybody. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces. And if you don't do the Instagram, you can always shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com, and I can help you with all of your cannabis growing questions. I'm excited for this episode.
I'm looking forward to it as well, and I'll pass it next to Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com and Dr. MJ Coco YouTube channel. And I am excited to be back with the panel and have a special guest this week, so this should be fun.
Happy to have you back as well. And next up, we've got Brandon Rust.
What's going on, everybody? Brandon Rust here. For anybody who's not familiar with me, you can find all my content at Instagram or on Instagram at rust.brandon. You can also check out Bokashi Earthworks at bokashiearthworks.com. You make fertilizers, microbes, soil amendments, seeds, all kinds of good stuff.
Happy to have you back. And just a reminder, as I'm doing it right now, my YouTube was kind of glitching out there for a second, but everybody go on and click over to the live chat if you want to see all the messages and not have anything filtered out by Instagram or YouTube algorithm, I should say. And next up, we've got our first Matthew of this evening, Matthew Gates. If he's with us. Matthew, you might be on mute. We're not quite ready yet. Well, since Matthew Gates did just jump in right as the show was starting, he might still be getting set up. So I'll take the moment to go ahead and introduce our guest for this week, Matthew Schackow.
Thank you.
We got a message from one of our longtime listeners. We have a listener out there, Kettle on Smoke, good dude, and ATG Acres vouched for them. And they said that they actually shared with me your results at the Emerald Cup. I believe it is this year for the solventless category. It looks like you took second place and fifth place. And so maybe we'll just start off a little bit there, and you could go ahead and talk about your background and the fact that you're a licensed cultivator at this point and entering into those bigger competitions and placing very high with lots and lots of entries, and maybe just share a little bit about that experience and what you entered.
Yeah, so little background on me. I moved to Humboldt about 20 years ago, 2003. It's actually this August, it'll be 20 years in Humboldt County. And I started a series of little grows, indoor home grows, things like that. And eventually was able to build it into enough to get a property. Times changed, went rec. And as times changed more, became a hash maker as well as a cultivator. So that's where things lie currently. Emerald Cup this year, that was really exciting and awesome. They were really kind to us. I ended up taking down second and fifth place. Second place was papaya. It's a cut I got from the guys at Straight Organics. Just a straight up old school tasty papaya cut. Just grown really nicely in living soil here in Salmon Creek at my farm. And the same thing with the fifth place award winner, lemon sour diesel lemon, however you want to call it. Everyone calls it something different. And that's a cut I got from the Source Nursery a few years ago. And I was sort of at a time when we weren't sure, a lot of people weren't sure what were washers, what weren't washers. And I just sort of had to wash all my material, and it ended up just being a delightful washer, nice and light colored. It batters up real moist and has that look that's really trending right now. People like, again, super fortunate. But this region, this place that I have here, Salmon Creek, Humboldt County, is one of the greatest places on the planet to grow cannabis in the sun. So I think that was the real, yeah,
internationally recognized.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with the Salmon Creek Big Bud, as you've been out there for about 20 years? And I know that was fairly notorious. It's made its way into a few major crosses. And I'm curious if you had any firsthand experience with that one.
So I've been at this spot for 8 years, and back in the day, yes, I had when I was like a little home grower, I experimented with some Salmon Creek Big Bud a couple times, and had pretty good results with it. It was a nice, reliable strain. It was a good strain, nice terps, and hardy. So it's a good one. We don't really see much more of that anymore. The times have changed quite a bit as far as demand. You might see some, it might be deep in the lineage of some of the popular strains currently, but it's not. I'm everything that I grow is really directed towards being washed and made into live rosin, and in a lot of cases decarbed then into liquid rosin, so that people can make carts with it. So I'm looking for specific things. I'm looking for fruity terps. I'm looking for gassy terps. I'm looking for high potency. That's what people like. It's just sort of the way it goes. So just sort of stay relevant and pick things that the market likes. And that's worked out really well for me.
Yeah, it seems like going back to the Big Bud thing and how it kind of fell out of flavor was it wasn't the most potent. It was more of a big yielder from a lot of accounts. But I think the most notable lineage that it popped up in modern times was in the original Granddaddy Purple. And that group has kind of gone through some shifts and changes here and there. But the original lineage, from what I understand, was Urkel crossed to Big Bud. And they've changed the story a little bit over the years and also lost some genetics and, relaunched things and things like that here and there. But that's definitely one of the ones that I would think was more notable for that strain in particular. But the reason that people prefer Urkel, even still to this day, I think is it was a little bit more potent, a little better tasting, might not have yield as well, might have been a little bit more difficult to grow. But the purists and the people that really kind of get super into it, I think would choose the Urkel over the GDP. And then there's others out there that argue that and Granddaddy Perp or Grape Ape are all the same thing, which I personally disagree with. But it's
and people might say the same thing about the Nepal. The Nepal was the one that I had back in the day when I first moved out here. And there was a great story behind it about a one cut being, sold to the Hells Angels for $100,000 or something like that. And then it was sort of over time, we started to see Urkel and Granddaddy, even pop up. So I kind of wonder where it all was commingled, purple wise. Yeah.
Yeah, Not So Dog has an interesting take on the Mendo Perps being kind of like a direct lineage of an Afghani that he kind of inherited from a old school OG and Humboldt. I might be mischaracterizing it a little bit, but that's from what I remember kind of how that story went. And that was another one of the big earlier purples that had a name on it. That wasn't just like a land race that somebody got their hands on. And it kind of gained popularity in that area in particular, which is definitely known for cultivation through the last several decades historically. Anybody on the panel, Spartan, Doc, Matthew, if you're here, or Brandon, have any questions for Matthew here? And or maybe we could check the chat, see if they've got any questions that are popping up.
No, it's just sort of nostalgic.
I didn't see any
I
really.
moved up there just before Matthew moved up there. Basically, I moved out of Humboldt County in 2003.
Oh, wow.
I lived up there for a couple of years though, but good times. Great place to grow cannabis.
I want to take a second because I heard his voice, and so he's with us now, to introduce Matthew Gates, our IPM specialist and just general badass dude. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Basically, all I wanted to let people know is if you don't know about me already, you can check me out at Sentinel.com or on my Sentinel YouTube channel. Got some cool videos coming out, including a short video about a Skunk Magazine article that just came out about how resistance testing is important in cannabis. We might talk about that today, perhaps, if that comes up. But since we're talking about lineages and things like that. The other thing is that at that Growcast collaboration, Pestapalooza, 29th on Saturday in San Diego, Dr. Coco will be there. I think Jack is trying to be there too. So if you want to meet those guys, you can hang out with him there. And also on the 30th, I'll be in LA giving the same Pestapalooza workshop deal. We'll talk about identification of pests and that kind of a thing. But check it out at pestapalooza.com. I'll put it in the chat too.
So to Mr. Schackow, I'm probably mispronouncing it, even though you just told me how to say it before the show. But are you experiencing any pests at this point in the season? Schackow.
You remember the Method Man song "To Cal"? You can remember it that way. To Cal.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking
Yeah,
like caw, like an eagle. Fucking eagles always got me fucked up. And Mendo
that's
dope.
yeah,
Caca.
yeah, that's the wrong direction.
Cacao.
Yeah, so I deal with mostly aphids are the biggest annoying problem that I have the hardest time with. And I'm on my shit. So aphids are the biggest problem. I don't really see too much else other than russet mites. Um, all pretty fairly easy to control for me for the most part, but the
What do
aphids are
you,
kind of the one that
how
I
do you go
struggle with the
about?
best. I use some soaps and some agricultural oil sometimes if it gets really bad, but mostly just soap. I like the Chester Boone's product. I don't have to worry about like an re-entry period or any of like worried about, I actually splashed some in my eye the other day. I washed it out and I was fine. You know what I mean? It's like nice to use products like that. So I go pretty heavy with the Chester Boones, or, I like that one because it's got a lower application rate than the safer product that's similar. And then I use the Biomarone products. I use the Regalia, and then I mix that alternating with Venerate or Grandivo, and those products work pretty well for me. I tend to go with the Regalia a little later than probably they say to, but I don't find any residual or any sort of like effect in the smoke. I stay away from sulfur because I'm washing everything that I grow. So that's one really important thing. And I stop with the soap, at the typical time, like a couple, 3 weeks into flowering or something like that. So basically those things. And then when I have things in the greenhouse, I lean a little more on lacewings and ladybugs. Ladybugs are like a little bit harder to get. There's like a whole shortage thing going on with ladybugs right now. I don't fully understand it, but yeah, I like to use them in sort of like more confined spaces, like when up in the greenhouse, when I'm in the propagation areas and things like that. But yeah, pretty simple on the IPM, I guess. And I should say that I lean pretty heavily on my earthworm tea, my compost tea. I'm laying down compost tea weekly, and it's pretty widely varied. And that obviously helps with the plant's immunity. And I brew some bacillus in there, some different things that just help with soil health, keep things from getting out of control pest wise.
So in terms of the non like living pests, or I guess technically molds and mildews and stuff are living, but thinking towards more the end of the season, I had a question just thinking, when is the end of season typically for you? And does a percentage of crop being outdoor greenhouse just end up going to mold or mildew, like even if it's a 1 to 5% or something like that? Or does the IPM/genetics and harvest time allow you to kind of negate that as much as you can?
So that's, yeah, so that varies widely. So the botrytis question, the downy and powdery mildew question, I would say downy and powdery mildew can be controlled 100% with good IPM. But botrytis, I feel as a full sun outdoor grower, I find that is up to Mother Nature. Usually 2 weeks after the first heavy rain, botrytis sets in, and lately it's been earlier and earlier. This last year we had some significant rains in September that did cause some significant dead loss, but the team's watching for it. I'm watching for it, and I do start using some if I do start seeing problems. And so, okay, so here's another portion of it. If it does rain early, like in September, or if it rains like the whole first week of October, which is terrible and does happen, I'll start laying down some a product called Zero Tall, which is like peracetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. I'm sure you guys already know.
We're familiar with that.
Yeah, I really like that product. I don't find that the hydrogen peroxide alone does as good a job as the hydrogen peroxide with the peracetic acid. I think it's peracetic acid. And so I start laying that down when the rains stop. Also with that, I'm physically drying off the plants. I have blowers and I'm going through the entire garden, blowing it off and shaking the plants. And that gets maddening because it sort of stops raining and I start that process, and then I get done with it and then it starts raining again. But it's just the joy of being a full sun outdoor grower in Humboldt County. Um,
Do you
So
do
yeah,
like
so
any
that's, I would say,
leaf removal or like excessive topping on fatter buds to try and give yourself a better chance at, reducing the botrytis essentially risk?
I don't mess with the buds much at all. But I do defoliate significantly. It's always the thing about growing here and like this is it's every year is different in the finishing season, especially, I mean, through the summer, I mean, we get hot spells. It's always really dry. Smoky weather might come in earlier or later, start supplementing some calcium, magnesium, a little extra in those conditions. We're just sort of like waiting for it to come. And every year is just really different. So, I'm constantly checking, constantly looking at the weather, and trying to make decisions before they need to be made a little bit. So yeah, it's always a moving goalpost.
Got to
Do
stay
you
on top of
do,
your game for sure.
do you do a lot of fresh frozen, or are you drying all that product?
Everything is fresh frozen.
Okay.
Yeah,
So my next question is, what does
yeah.
your dry look like? I mean, it's got to be a big room.
What what does what look like?
You're
Well, if it's
drying.
fresh
I
frozen,
was,
they're
I
just
was,
going to a
Sorry.
bag,
so
right?
if it's fresh
Oh,
frozen, it'd be a
oh,
lot
the
easier to
drying.
just throw in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
freezer.
No, for the fresh frozen, I have two Connex freezer shipping containers. One of them's a 8x40, and the other one's a 20x40. So, I'm sorry, 8x20. And I fill those completely at the end of the
Nice.
season. Yeah, yeah. It's a whole shitload of fresh fro, between 10 and 15,000 pounds,
How many
depending
plants
on
and
the year, and depending on the dead loss. So I have about 650 in large pots throughout the yard that you can see kind of some of behind me. There's those vary between 100 and 200 gallon pots. This place is always in the process of sort of building. So it's like, as years progress and the pots need filled with fresh soil, I sort of upgrade them. So like between 100 and 200 gallon pots, and there's about 650 of those, and then I have 6 black box greenhouses, or light depth greenhouses, whatever you. Black box is kind of an archaic term, but black box greenhouses, and I have 6 of those that I'm flipping tarps on, and those are like about 12 by 75 each. And those, a total out, I think there's like about 1,500 smaller plants in those greenhouses, and that'll get pulled here in about a month, and then I'll replug that. I do my depths a little bit later because I like to get the nice part of the season. I always find that I do better when I start the tarp sometime in early June, instead of trying to go for like even three. A lot of people try for the third round of depths, but I just find you start losing up to like 25 or 30% if you start too early or late.
That's a good thing to bring up. And another kind of question I had for you is down south, we've got about 3 of us in the San Diego area, and we got a lot of rain and cold and overcast weather in the first probably 6 months or so of this year, first half. And being a more full sun and even greenhouse grower, I'm curious how the early season was up there for you this year. And did that slow you down or have any setbacks in the early half of the season?
Yeah, so it did. It took a while for the nighttime temperatures to come up. I mean, the diurnal shift is really what affects, I think, the plant metabolism in a big way out here. Just it getting too cold in the nighttime to the point where the soil can't warm up enough to where things start happening quickly enough in the day for it to really matter. So it slows the metabolism, and everything works much slower. So yeah, that does happen. It was kind of a pain to get the amendments to compost. It was kind of a pain when I put things out in the beginning of June. I have everything in my greenhouse for up until that point in pots and up potting and all that sort of thing, pest control up there, and then things come down. I shoot for the 1st of June, mostly because of my proximity to the coast. I'm only 20 miles as the crow flies to the ocean, so I get much cooler temperatures anyways. June can be real foggy in the mornings, but this year the nighttime temperatures were just so low, and it continued on, and it actually caused I had one strain fully go into flowering. That was a pain in the butt. I've never seen that. I've never had a problem wondering if plants are going to flowering around the solstice like I did this year. And it was like just because of like super cloudy and cold conditions. So yeah, it was a struggle. I did, I like to stick to June 1st. Um, things are in the greenhouse. They're getting the nighttime temperatures, but they're also being supplemented with light. So at that point, I really like to get things out, but I can again, sort of make the decision to keep things in a little longer. But at a certain point, things just got to get outside, and that's where I was at this year.
Does your greenhouse have like a grow light style setup, or is it more just lights to keep them in the veg cycle?
Yeah, it's just for propagation. Yeah, just to keep them vegging. So they run from like 4 in the morning until 8:30, and then until 9 o'clock or something. From like 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon until 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so you're really relying predominant, like almost all on the strength of the sun, and the lights that you're using are just to keep them in the right part of the cycle while you're getting them to the right sizes and taking clones and things like that. So some people, I think that might be a foreign concept when they think of a greenhouse with lights. They're like, oh, the lights are going to make the plants kind of grow more, and it's more just to prevent them from going to flower, which especially in a season like this one where it's been so cloudy is pretty pivotal, and even you know can't be controlled for sometimes when you put them out close to the solstice, and it just triggers. Sometimes I think that might be like the early flowering stuff, maybe, or not quite an auto flower, but like that stuff's like right on the verge, where a lot of outdoor growers I think get a better a lot of indoor guys, we just go from 18.6 to 12.12, so we don't really know when that transition happens. So it's like, well, yeah, it's a photo period because it can stay in veg while it's under 18, but if it would have been under 16 or 15 or 14, it might have gone. And I think that's where those cloudy days, some of those strains that are a little more on that borderline can start to express themselves.
It's just interesting
Yes.
that days would do it. And that, do you know what your PPFD is under the supplemental lights when it's like dark out, but you're running just the light? Like how much power you're putting to those lights?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, they're
But
they're
not
old
much.
school. No, I mean, they're old school high pressure sodiums. Like
Okay.
they're just hung super high. I mean, it's
Yeah, just
hard
to
to,
give some
yeah.
light, but you're not really hitting them with dense enough light to be like growing under that. Yeah.
Not really, no. It's really just to keep them from flowering. But I do notice that certain strains are way more sensitive to photo period fluctuations. And I actually bought a strain this year from Purple City Genetics called Pineapple Burst, and it just completely went into flowering. And it was under the same. It was in the supplemental light greenhouse, and it was under the same conditions as all the plants next to it, and none of those plants went into flowering. So.
Pineapple stuff is really fast. Like the pineapple upside down cake is like a 50 something day finisher, and I'm not sure if the pineapple that
Wow,
is working with is in the same
that is
realm.
quick.
But yeah, that I think it might be a pineapple genetic related thing, that they're really fast finishers, and maybe even like a early trigger, or uh, not quite auto flower, but a lot closer than a traditional photo period.
Yeah, yeah.
I have some thoughts, as I'm sure a lot of other home growers out there who would dream to someday make this their full-time kind of living and career and get into the legal market. We've got a cultivator who's with us right now, Brandon Rust, who was a San Diego grower, but moved to Oklahoma before getting into the legal market. So I'm curious if you could share kind of, at the beginning, you gave us the, long story short, but what was the process like going from, being that home grower and then getting a property, having the dream and saying like, I'm going to go through all these applications and permits, and like, how did you actually do it? Did you have to have lawyers and teams and millions of dollars, or what was the process like?
Can I just ask
Okay.
Matthew, his camera the other way or your phone over? We're getting just this sort of vertical image of you. And that shit, there we go.
Is that better?
That's
All
much
right.
better.
Much better.
No
Sorry
And it's
worries,
about
no
a
worries.
great view in the background
Yeah,
too.
no worries.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I figured this would be nice. Okay, so that's a lot of things. Okay, I'll start from the beginning. I would say from the beginning of that question, you said, how did it start? So I came here as a student. I was going to school at HSU for environmental science with an emphasis in water quality and hazardous waste. And I was growing in my closet. So I was basically sleeping like with the lights, shining out of the corners in my apartment in Arcata. That's northern Humboldt, for those who don't know. And so I did that for a little bit. when I first moved to Arcata, I had a job. That was my last official non-cannabis job in 2003. I worked as a laborer on the freshwater school, and I decided that wasn't really for me. And that while I was in school, I was gonna, take a minor in cannabis growing. And I sort of experimented, and things just sort of fell into place for me. And I was able to turn, one little closet into a little house, turn that, little 8 lighter, 6 lighter, I think it was actually, and then a 12 lighter, and then might as well rent another house. And then, there was a problem in Arcata with housing because of people like me, but it was eventually squashed, and we all left and went to McKinleyville. And then, so once that whole scene was tapped, it was time to look for a property. And again, it just sort of fell into place, just like all my cannabis life things happen, sort of seem to. And I found a place out on Ammon Ridge, up Titlow Hill Road, sort of notorious area for cannabis growing in Humboldt. And I was up there for about 5 years. I put a tank up there, and cleared some trees, and built a little greenhouse with a cabin attached to it, and some depths, some hippie hoops, we call them. I still have hippie hoops. I love hippie hoops. They're the best thing ever for depping in full sun. And I did that for about 5 years, and I was going to school at the same time. And eventually it was sort of like I was at my last semester, and they started telling us what we were going to make as environmental scientists. And I was sort of out. I was out at that point on the school thing, because I kind of had a career that I created myself. And at the time it was all like to clubs. We would for outdoor, we'd all keep a book of 215s and a note from whatever dispensary gave them to us. I had a great place in Hollywood, and it was pretty funny. You get a few like celebrities and things, like just like their script in your book. And so we did that whole thing, driving weed down to LA and selling it. And that was my thing for a long time. I was, in the indoor days, I was growing what a lot of people, started. They called it all kinds of things, but it was called Headband at one point. It was called Private Reserve OG at one point. It was just the OG that everybody wanted. There was one point that I was selling that for $4,500 a pound. So I had a little place in McKinleyville where I was doing that, and I had my place in Willow Creek. And between throwing down huge runs at that house in McKinleyville and doing the summer thing out in Willow Creek, I was able to buy a much nicer property, the one that I'm on currently here in Southern Humboldt. So I did that for a few years with the whole 215 move, book of scripts, just selling it to dispensaries. It was the best time that I've ever had in my entire life. And I'm so lucky to have
you could
lived
stack
it.
like 99 plants on a single property with, however many patients. I think it was like 12 per patient.
So Humboldt was always a canopy county. So you could do 100 square feet per script. And there wasn't really a limit as long as you had this note from a dispensary.
That's crazy. That's even better than
Yeah. Yeah. So I did that until I did that all the way through the time when people started speaking of legalization, brought the price down. It was really sad and unfortunate. We're talking like $400 or $500 a pound, and then that sort of undulated for a couple of years leading up to rec. And I was just told by my attorneys that it was best that I go for legalization. And so I did that because I always find that when you pay people a lot of money for their opinions, that you should always listen to them. So I did that. And so as far as the process goes, I was in on the first round of Humboldt County permitting. So it was made really easy for us. They made a lot of accommodations and helped us. So I actually did that all on my own. I used a local resource consulting company that called Timberland Resources. Shout out Timberland Resources. And they helped me do all the paperwork as far as the scientific studies that needed done. And things I couldn't write up myself, biological assessments, things like that. And so, yeah, I plugged away at the county permitting process, which is that's still, I mean, I ran a couple marathons in 2009, but I would say that this was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever, just getting through the county was so hard. I don't know if I think a lot of it was that they were figuring stuff out. Um, like, they hadn't even figured out how to issue, like the insurance companies hadn't even figured out how to issue surety bonds at this point that the state was requiring, just for example. So the state was figuring out, they were, I like they were flying the plane as they were building it, so to speak. And that was a great descriptor. Everything was a moving goalpost. Every 30 seconds, they would turn around and tell you that you needed another $3,000 to $10,000 report, and give you some unreasonable, deadline to do so. And you just sort of have to figure it out. As far as financially getting through this process, I think that we were all made to think that, I think that the rhetoric was that you will have to come up with millions of dollars immediately to be able to do this. And in reality, we were able to chip away at it. And, you may have had 2 or 3 seasons before any of this would actually all be paid for. And that really was the case. For me, staying afloat through all of the madness depended 100% on having manufacturing. If I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't be here today at all. I would have gone the way of many of my comrades. Just having control over my product, not having to, I still wait on people to get paid, but being able to turn it into something else. I knew that was going to be important from the very beginning. And that's sort of why I, as at the same time of doing the legal farm, I was going the manufacturing route. And that's sort of another whole story to part of this story. But
So you feel like if you would have just focused on just the growing aspect, you'd have struggled worse, and that the manufacturing
it's not even a question. 50% of the cultivators have shut down this year in California, did not renew their licenses. So, he's one of the 50% that survived.
Yeah, that makes sense why a lot of the MSOs try to come in right from the get and be as vertically, integrated as possible and be in control of every part of the process. It makes sense because otherwise everybody wants a piece of the pie and the price goes up, up, and up, and you can't compete with anybody else.
Well, initially that wasn't supposed to be legal. They didn't want anyone to have ownership of a farm, a distribution, and a dispensary or delivery service. They wanted it to be separate operations. So, mom and pop could have their grow, then mom and pop could have their distribution, and then mom and pop could have their delivery service. But what happened is every single
It was a bad idea that they did that, because you can operate a vertically integrated business, although it is a little bit more difficult to keep track of a lot of, your payrolls and your taxes and this and that, and, all of your business management stuff. But that's the way to go, man. Being able to,
I agree.
The whole thing with California, like you had to give your product to somebody else, usually on the cuff, dude. And a motherfucker, if they're like, oh, we're bankrupt, we can't pay you, that motherfucker might have just lost their whole crop. I know several people who had their whole crop with a distributor and they went out of business, and then they fucking lost everything, dude.
Part of me thinks that some of those distributors were buying up a lot of shit and then intentionally just bankrupting because they were friends or coworkers with these other farms. So
I'm sure there's a non-zero number of that.
Legitimate fraud that was happening. Burner is under multiple lawsuits. I won't get into it, but Junkie is suing him, and so are several other of his people that he's worked with in the past, because he's trying to bring this, like, I don't want to get too into it, but he's bringing old school tactics into the legal market, which don't fly because people will fight you with the pen. They're not going to fight you in the streets. It's not the old school anymore.
Farmers didn't know how to and didn't want to have to defend themselves.
Exactly.
We were used to being able to, the best way to say it is, we were used to being able to collect our money other means. Let's just say by other means.
Yeah,
and
dude.
then we came into this.
Somebody owed you money, you go kick their door in back in the day,
Yeah, so these guys figured out, these guys don't use contracts or know their way around them or have any interest in using them. We can use them as the bank. And that's what most of these guys have done. And a lot of them are, feeling frosty. There's a lot of people who are in trouble right now for using farmers as the bank to build their company. Heritage Mendocino. There's like a lot of people.
Speedy Weedy is under a huge
Speedy Weedy is in a lot of trouble. So
they
it's just
there's punitive
they
damages though.
realize,
It's going to come back around because essentially
yeah,
they
they
pay 3 to
realize,
9 times the amount of the money. A few people settle with them and maybe they stole 100,000 and they pay them back 70 or 60 or whatever. But the people that didn't settle are going to get a class action lawsuit and shut down those companies that are fucking people. So ultimately
yeah,
it will sort itself
they
out.
just, or they go bankrupt in one state and go to another state. I mean, it's just I don't fully yeah, they just played us. I mean, I got used by a few companies early on, you know, and what they never didn't pay me, but one company took a year and a half to pay me, you know. So I'm like getting ready to chop the next year, and they're starting to pay me out, you know. I mean, farmers can't exist that way. We can't exist that way. So yeah, we needed to defend
Terrible.
ourselves. We needed to be smarter, and we just, you know, I did it too. I mean, we a lot of us did it. I think
Something I
the
want to
biggest
touch
thing.
on. You said
Yeah.
earlier that you had a minor in cannabis, which I think was a joke or you're being facetious. But
Yes.
now there are actual cannabis colleges. There's Oaksterdam
That's true.
University, regular colleges like UC Irvine or whatever have cannabis classes. So I just wanted to clarify that, like when you said that, that was more of a tongue-in-cheek statement because there are
Yes.
people out there that listen in Canada. We have Canadian listeners that are like going to college and getting their minors in cannabis and getting their degrees in cannabis and things like that, which is a whole, I guess, separate can of worms. But it is interesting that that has become a thing. And when you were doing it, probably wasn't actually a thing, even though you were at like Humboldt State University, which you would think would be the place where they'd have stuff like that happening. Although there was related things like biology or environmental stuff that you could study. It
Great
wasn't.
botany program.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
botany program.
I took botany classes at HSU, so
Nice.
I know that.
Nice.
Yeah.
My friend went to, I visit them. They played lacrosse there. And I just got to say, HSU, if you haven't been, like, it's worth just going to the university just to walk around, like the Redwood Forest National Park, like this university is beautiful, at least in my opinion, from an Ohio boy. It's Humboldt is a different world up there. Arcata is beautiful and the people are awesome. Even like if you're in a Greyhound, there'll be like an 80-year-old man going to the bathroom in the bus and then it comes out smelling like skunk. It's just like, you don't see that
Awesome.
where I'm from. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, arcade is funny, for sure.
Interesting place for sure. I'm curious if has anybody seen any questions from the chat, or if we have any more questions from any of the panelists that might have popped up throughout our discussion so far.
Not really that I've seen. But if you
One thing,
do, if you do,
sort of a little local history, but man, when I was up there, houses in Arcata were getting rented out and converted to grows, like left and right in 2001, 2002. And you say like that's started, and then it got cut off, and everybody moved to McKinleyville. What happened? What did the DA sort of shift his tune, or was it?
So the city of Arcata imposed a tax on your PG&E bill, your electric bill. So if you were over some percentage, you paid an extra amount, and it made it less affordable or less profitable to grow there. And then also it was a climate of get out of town. It definitely was. I had an interaction where
I was there. I mean, I could
Yeah.
feel that, and being really sympathetic to the pro cannabis side, I could also see sort of the complaints that some other homeowners had and stuff like that when properties would get converted next door to them. And you know,
the city needed housing for the university. That was the big crux of that was the whole issue.
Yeah.
They needed more housing for the school, which
They're tiny houses too. They're not like big
now-
massive things. They're pretty small relatively, I would say, for considering where it's at.
Houses. Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's
Yep.
I think it's important to highlight a little bit of history too. Like for me at least, coming out of San Diego, we had our indoors. Nobody was going crazy big. The people that were in Northern California, their indoors were always a lot bigger. They were running diesel generators, and it's like that's where we would go to get work when we ran out. Like we would go get indoors because we could go get large packs from Northern California where we couldn't go get 30 or 40 locally. We could go get a selection. We could go get 4 10-packs or 5 10-packs of different stuff, always in Northern California. And they were kind of known. Northern California was known for having good indoor. It wasn't until around like
That's because camp.
2007, 2008, when everybody started throwing up depths and really blowing out like Blue Dream and Diesel, and everybody was, you know, slanging Sour D to the East Coast. But it was, dude, it was known for the good quality indoor before it ever was like people were, you know, going out getting
It was
you
a
know,
cycle branding because it was outdoor first, and
Outdoor first,
then
absolutely. When I was there, everybody
campaign
said to
against
me, indoor
marijuana
is a
planting
thing.
or propagation
That's what I
camp.
thought too.
Camp
like
came and they raided all
before
its outdoor,
times.
forcing people inside, which
Yeah.
makes no sense really in California, but it happened, and it ultimately taught a bunch of people how to be fucking savage ass growers inside and
Yeah.
avoid detection, doing things like using diesel generators, being off the grid and not having to pay the taxes. Even here in San Diego, I still grow and I have a small home grow, and I get like the 100 to 200% usage of my neighbors because I'm in like a tiny house, little community. And so I get charged even more than that percentage of my use. They tax you like on top of that. They're like, oh, you're using so much, so we're going to encourage you to use less, encourage you to be more efficient. And so they charge the shit out of you. It's like way higher. And especially like if you do the peak hour versus non-peak hour thing, there's different plans and stuff. But yeah, electricity gets crazy. But back to the weed side of things, even though that is weed related, I'm curious if Matthew, you have any favorite strains either currently or historically, and if you're smoking tonight with us, what are you toking on?
Okay, one thing really quick though, just to comment about the diesel grows. I think actually no, a big part of that was also the diesel spills that were going on. They were finding red dye in you know in endangered water systems, you know, sensitive regions and stuff like that, and it was killing animals and fish, and the county went after a lot of that stuff with Fish and Game, you know, for that reason. Favorite strains. I decided not to dab or smoke during the interview just because I wanted to be able to think on my feet here. But I right now I'm smoking on a little jar of banana guava, or I'm sorry, a guavanana #5 that I pheno hunted last year. I got the seeds from 6 Star Seeds. He's an awesome breeder and makes things for, you know, for washing basically. And I got the guavanana from him, the seeds last year. He just shot them to me for, you know, for free just to try them out. And yeah, I pheno hunted those, and guavanana #5 seemed like it was the best one. So I washed a bunch of that, and so I'm puffing on that. I got a jar of what did I just finish? Oh, I just finished a jar of mango lassi, which is a wash mix that I made out of mimosa, fresh frozen, and straw guava. Fresh frozen straw guava is like kind of a one of like the gassy ones. I got this one from this Skittles guys. I couldn't tell you the cross on it. But yeah, so I had a few kilos of each, and I usually do washes of like 25 to 30 kilos. So I had like, you know, whatever it is, 10 of mimosa and 15 of, 10 of mimosa and 15 of straw guava, and I threw them together. And I actually just had this thought. I was like, oh, I should call this mango lassi. And it actually, after the wash and the press and the batter, I was like, holy shit, like this actually has mango terps. So that's one of my things right now that I've really liked. And then I always have a bucket of this papaya that I grew last year that I got the cut from the Straight Organic guys. And you know, it's addictive.
They're the
dangerous.
STR8 straight
Yeah,
organic.
yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah.
have killer stuff, and papaya has been a killer for a long ass time. I like the high, I like the flavor.
Won both first and second too in Missouri at the cup that I was judging like
Nice.
last weekend. It was 2 different papaya crosses that won first and second.
It's a real cheat code for contests. And the reason I think that part of it is like not every judge is going to clean their dab rig in between every dab. So like once that papaya dab hits, like they're tasting papaya for the next 2 or 3 dabs. So
And it's loud and bright.
I
It
just
just
think,
like it's so
That's a
distinct.
neat way. That's actually kind of fun though. I like that you say it that way because I bet there's a lot to that, especially in like taste tests of all kinds of things, right? You got to make it. That's just like the age-old Pepsi Coca-Cola taste test, right? Like people buy more Coca-Cola allegedly because it's more drinkable, but the Pepsi does better because in that small sample, you're like Jack says, bright hits
Yeah.
your tongue and you're like, whoa, but
Yep.
maybe a little rich. But yeah, no, I love that kind of
The
stuff.
most in 1 ounce isn't necessarily going to be what you prefer the most after 100 ounces of it, and whether that's cannabis or cola.
Makes
True.
sense, right? But yeah, a great way to be like strident and have people go, "Whoa, this is definitely not what I was tasting
Yeah.
before."
It's also just good on its own, out of competition.
What's that?
I was just saying it's also just good on its own outside competition.
Yeah, but
It
definitely
was,
having
it was
something that
good. It
stands
was a
out.
good variety, man. I was really surprised. It was really cool because the cup out there in the competition, it was all, mom and pop businesses, but because of the legislation out in Missouri, because it was like a $25,000 to get a license and it's just a lotto, so you're not even guaranteed. So all of the businesses are just all underground. So there's a huge underground community, and they're all just doing it regular, doing traditional market, and it was awesome to see that. I loved it.
But with so many people, I guess that means misery does love company. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. I appreciate it.
I actually got it on
Tough
time.
crowd. Tough crowd. Boo this man.
I was laughing muted, so you might be able to go back and watch.
Taking a bong hit. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
That was
No,
clever, though. I
that's
think
interesting.
that probably went over some of our listeners' heads.
Oh, I don't think so.
Say test.
But actually, on that point, no, this is probably not a great place to go. But I am curious what people think, because we're just talking about vertical integration versus horizontal, and obviously people have very strong emotions about whether people should, quote unquote, should be allowed to grow. Like, should we have maximal commercial? Should we have stratification of what tiers you're allowed to be in? Whether you can put those together, or whether they have to be separate, or is it better to just have a bunch of people and let them in? Or is it better to have like a very controlled, stratified system where there's not very many players?
This is kind of my
Free market,
opinion,
baby.
right? Because being out here in Oklahoma and having over 6,000 grows and over 2,500 dispensaries and probably another 3,500 processors, what happens typically is it causes economic growth and prosperity. Even if people don't stay in business, it still helps with the economic development, right? And what happens with the market is markets mature. And what happens is there's always going to be, somebody who is thinking about their wallet and will be a cost conscious consumer. But the people who are able to produce really good quality products consistently, those are the people that have been able to, build brands and make names. And those people are able to stay in business. And it's kind of like the good players kind of win when there's an open market, and the bad players kind of just stop playing. And
One thing that I noticed, though, I'll put this, is that because Jack made a good point as an American, free market, baby. But if you make it really free, you end up getting little oligopolies, don't you? Because it's free, but that means there's nothing against people like collaborating.
There is things that are against them already in the antitrust laws. You can't have price fixing and sell things at incredible losses for extended periods of time. Even though it's not often prosecuted, it is illegal. You can look into the FTC, you can look into the SEC and things like this. There are laws and there are regulations that are already in place that could be enacted onto cannabis businesses, as they are businesses like any other business. Essentially, it's a money-making mechanism. So I think the free market can sort itself out, like we've seen a little bit in Oklahoma. And in Brandon's point,
just point out, Jack, that all of those things are basically checks against the free market.
Free market,
the regulations that prevent the free market from being fully free. Because if it's fully free, it doesn't work very well. And I guess we recognize there are some places that we need to sort of prevent monopolies from just forming, because that's not in everybody's interest, right? That you need some of that antitrust regulation and these other kinds of regulation. And in lots of different industries, and cannabis is certainly going to be one of them, there are different regulations that are suitable for that specific regulation in order for it to function well as an economic unit. I certainly don't think like plant counts and other things like that are going to be required for the regulation for sort of the cannabis market, but just having no restrictions whatsoever, I think, would be equally problematic.
Yeah, because then you can just come in and bankroll it, and then there's none of this nice competition that we want, or that I guess some people want, between like smaller groups. Because I agree that a planned economy historically is not done so hot.
Yeah,
Unless
but-
under incredible strain.
A purely free market economy hasn't done so hot either. So it's not that
Exactly.
somewhere in the middle. It's taking advantage of the sort of dynamism of the free market while still being able to pursue social goals that we have that don't just get trampled by it.
I'd say the problem is
Obviously-
that the market's not really free because it gets captured by large corporate. Large
Exactly.
corporate
That's
comes
kind of what
in,
I'm
and
alluding
then,
to.
like you're saying, the free market no longer becomes free because you get monopolies and oligopolies. They can lobby and
That's
make
what happens
laws.
in a freely unregulated free market. People with the most money, when they see a profit-making opportunity, will swoop in and buy all the capital up.
If
Even
you
within
founder
regulation, this
effect it,
happens.
if you win, but see, also, even if you started small and achieve this greatness and then you become, bigger, it's within your best interest to like kick the ladder and not let other people get up to you in a zero-sum sort of way. In the same way, I think that the logic of like what Brandon was saying, a vertical integration might be superior. But
I'll say
at the
this:
same,
the new businesses have some opportunity to serve markets that aren't currently being served by like these big businesses if they're not providing the quality or products that people want. So that's where smaller businesses can win out by either producing something newer, better. Like a delivery service is better for a lot of people than a dispensary. So people having stuff delivered to their home is going to be better than driving into a shop. And that's just one market. And granted, the shop can start having
parking
delivery
lot.
options and things like that. But and to Brandon's point, like even when people fail, there's like mergers and acquisitions. So like the plumbers got paid, the electricians got paid, the builders got paid.
True.
So somebody in that economy made money even in a failing business. And then when that business fails, they can sell, maybe at a loss, but some of it gets acquired. Some of those people keep working. Some of that equipment gets put back to use. And so it's not like a total loss, but we're getting super into like the economic sides of things, which, I mean, this is a business and we're talking to a few people here that have commercial licenses or work very closely with large operations. And so it does come into consideration, like our local economies, our local laws, federal laws, state laws, and even going international when it does become federally legal. Like there's so many implications that even just dealing with what we have currently in place, it's kind of difficult to nail down exactly the best way of doing things.
Yeah,
Because
Matt, what's your opinion?
On which subject?
I
We've been
know,
jumping
right?
around a bit.
I'll let Jack figure it out since I interrupted him.
I guess we were talking earlier about like, what do you think? Is it better to go more like free market and just let everybody have a license, or is it better to have a certain amount of regulation to, I guess, stem the, let's say, glasshouse farms in California right now is being criticized because they have more glass houses, greenhouses than anybody else in the state. They're producing more tonnage of cannabis than anybody else, and they're also selling things at very low prices, trying to control and manipulate the market, according to some. This is just an observation that many people are making, and so that's kind of like the one end, and the other end is more regulation and things like that.
So yeah, so on one side, the biggest issue we have right here when comparing to other markets and things like that is the black market being this elephant in the room at all times. And there's the way at least California has set it up, there's no possible way that California is going to compete with this already established bolstering black market that,
Have to agree.
let's face it, that nobody is enforcing. And I'm not pushing for that. I'm not saying that we want to enforce it at all. All I'm saying is it's not being enforced to the point where there are whole huge meetups and people advertise outwardly on Instagram. No one's doing anything, and they shouldn't be.
They're called
one's
secret
doing
sessions,
anything.
but they're out in the
Yeah.
public.
It changes the
No one's
market
doing
that you're
anything.
playing in.
Anything
Well, and to
about
put
it.
numbers
So,
to it, there's 50,000 growers that applied for permits before Prop 64. They gave out 5,000 permits roughly. Of those 5,000, only 2,500 are still operating. So that means that there's 2,500 doing it legal, and that I would guess 45,000 of them didn't just close up shop and stop growing. So roughly 45,000 growers out there probably still producing and still making money, whether in California or elsewhere.
they're doing great. They're doing better than they would have been if California hadn't put this whole silly little game together. So the first part of this that I want to point out is against the black market, California loses. So this entire thing is a joke. Metric is a huge joke. The licensing process is a huge joke. The only way to make any of this make sense is to give out amnesty licenses to trappers. Just let people have them. Stop charging for the licensure. disband completely the DCC and make metric the standalone part of all this that we have to deal with. There shouldn't be enforcement on cannabis the way that it's being enforced in California. If they're not doing this, they're not coming out randomly and ruining the entire day to friggin' vineyards. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we want to come and inspect. Well, that screws my entire week because I have to make sure everything looks good, or you're gonna.
They do that in agriculture, though. Absolutely. At any time, they can come in and say, hey, I want to inspect.
Okay, so
they don't do it enough, though,
really.
Matthew. You highlighted an organic grower who sold organic goods for like years, unregulated, without doing any organic practices, as organic, just to get more money for it, even though he's growing it all traditional.
Yeah, true.
So I think that you're right. There is enforcement, but in cannabis in California, it is as if we are criminals. The entire thing was set up as if we are criminals. Like, banking is completely. I feel like a criminal every time I go to the bank. So it's. I mean, it's.
I do sometimes.
It's a very odd. Yeah, it's a very odd situation. So that's the first part of this that I want to point out to your question. That I think that amnesty for trappers is the only way to make California, and the disbanding of the DCC and the licensure process completely in California is the only way to make A and B make sense. The other part of this is the consumer issue that is focused highly on mids. And it has a lot to do with it already being very expensive by the time it gets to the consumer. They want a good deal. It's just like any other product in that regard. People want to get high, but they want to just pay as much as they barely have to, or they want to feel good when they leave, like they ended up with something tasty, whether or not that's, something extra, whether that's like a 4 or 5 months old pre-roll that's probably brown if you bust it open or whatever. So the mids market is real in California, and it drives it hard. And so, but the thing is, you're seeing mids companies go out of business left and right. So this whole idea that cannabis can be put into a corporate framework is a farce. It just can't be. And every time anybody tries to do it, they end up going out of freaking business. And so the people that are doing the best, as far as I can tell, because I work extraordinarily hard, insane weeks. I work weekends, I work late nights. I'm making hash and I'm running this farm, and I'm barely making it on an acre with a wash lab. And so I know trappers are doing wonderfully right now. I know lots of them. They're great people. So I just would say, it's the mids market is I think the biggest problem with the second part of what you mentioned. The consumer wanting a good deal, and all the taxes and the costs that go into us being able to operate. It doesn't leave much room for a high quality product. So like, for instance, the majority of the business that I've been doing in the last many months, is decarb liquid rosin for carts. And that's, it's not an easy move to be in retail as a small producer in California, because the retail game is very complicated to play, because the corporate entities just waste money on these dispensaries. We want lunches for our crew. We want 1,000 sample units that we're going to turn around and sell, but we just want them as samples. We want you to be in our shop 2 times a month. So you're paying somebody that's local, that like works for a company, that you're hiring out somebody, you're giving them a rundown on your products, and then they're going in and maybe even mispronouncing your name, not representing your it's a very difficult, expensive game to play for small time producers. And I was in retail for a while with a jar of dabs, a fresh press and batter, and it got to the point where I couldn't maintain the dispensaries the way they needed to be maintained to accommodate them, but to compete against these bigger corporate entities that I feel have made it hard for all of us.
And the unregulated market.
I was gonna say, it's a lot like sorry to talk over, but it's very much like you can go and watch like a TV series for free on some black website, right? Like, where you're not really supposed to be able to access it, but it's free and people do it. Like, you have to have a certain quality level, but they make it so difficult to be actually competitive, like you're saying. I completely agree with you.
The word that no one said yet: tax. Well, Matthew just said it a second ago. But tax when prohibition of alcohol ended, do you know anybody know what the tax on alcohol was for the legal market?
No
Said it was
idea.
There was?
1%. 1%. And do you know why they made it
Federal?
1%? At the beginning, alcohol was 1% tax after prohibition because they wanted to squash
Right after?
the
Was
black
that at the
market.
federal level? Taxes are usually done locally, so it would have been different in
It
different.
was federal because it was a literal
Hmm.
amendment to the Constitution, and they had to re-amend the Constitution to end the prohibition of alcohol. But right after that, the federal alcohol tax was 1%. They could have state stuff and it was a little bit more, but the goal was, and the reason they did that was to squash the black market and illicit or unregulated makers of alcohol. So when you have a 1% tax, you're barely paying, the producer's barely paying anything, the customer's barely paying anything. They don't notice any difference. In San Diego right now, if I go buy $100 gram of concentrate, I pay $132 out the door. So there's a 32% tax on
This
products.
is an interesting difference. The reason the alcohol prohibition ended is because prohibition was recognized as dangerous. That prohibition was causing the black market, and prohibition ended. The big thrust was to dismantle the black market because the black market was supporting criminal gangs that were destabilizing society. And
And you drink bad alcohol and you go
that's
blind.
totally different than why cannabis was sort of stopped the prohibition of cannabis. It wasn't because to eliminate the black market was never the goal. The goal was, to decriminalize sort of these activities and to possibly make tax revenue off of them. And that's why sort of a lot of people ended up carrying on with that. And it's just interesting. I haven't really thought about that before, but absolutely the goal at the end of prohibition was to dismantle the black market. And that's never been the goal in cannabis with as much thrust.
And now there is a direct relation from Colorado and California. I know businesses here that there's direct cartel Mexico connections with finances. The way that in Colorado their dispensaries are set up is they get like a ticket for the amount of bank in their vault, and they have some armored cars come by like once every so often, pick up all the cash, and then give them a credit to their account. And so a bunch of out of country or state operators came in with a bunch of cash and said, hey, this is all from our dispensary sales, and essentially had the government launder their money or wash their money for them. So there's been some really crazy shit that has happened in the unfolding of this. And like you're saying, Doc, they're not really deliberately trying to, with ending the prohibition of cannabis, squash the black market, clearly, because if they wanted to do that, they would do like historically we saw with alcohol. All those people that were bootlegging, they had Tommy guns, they had faster cars, they were able to outrun the cops, they were able to outshoot the cops. And the reason is they had all this fucking money. And that doesn't seem to be
pay off the cops. That was the real problem. They
Yeah.
started paying off the cops and then paying off the politicians and the mayors and like owning,
control it. Yeah.
stabilizing society, corrupting society from the inside like that. And that was the sort of the problem with prohibition. That's why we turned against prohibition, because it was creating corruption in society.
Now I have this question because I actually have the same sentiment that Matt has, I think, which is that like it is, even though it would be a Band-Aid removal, and even though there would be other trade-offs, I think that would have to be considered. One of those trade-offs would also be, this is not against anyone growing at home, or that I'm not trying to say that people are incapable, but I brought it up before. Sometimes people apply, in my experience, sometimes people apply things they shouldn't apply to their plants because it gets rid of the pests. And they don't know that it's actually super toxic. This happens a lot. This even happens with people who are supposed to know better.
Or they know and don't care.
Or they're ambivalent,
This is the real
or
reason
they're
why the black
uninformed.
market is dangerous to consumers, right? Like,
but see, yeah, so how that's I think the square, that the circle that has to be squared, or however that phrase goes.
yeah.
Because
I believe
how do
that
you
testing should be dictated by the market.
what does
I
that
believe
mean?
that testing-
People, when I was in 215, I worked at a medical
I disagree
dispensary
with
delivery,
that.
and we had testing done every month on the products that we picked up. So
Exactly.
at least once a month we had, and people would pay a little bit more for our stuff in the private market, and we labeled it all organic, and we would go to our best extent to make sure everything was tested for pesticides, molds, mildews, and things like that. But this was very uncommon. All the other delivery services that I would look at, you could just buy an eighth for half the price and it wouldn't have any testing. Or if it did, it would be like a screenshot of a test from maybe a year ago that they put on all their pounds. So
Right.
I think that people should either be able, people should be able to say, I'm not going to buy a product that I don't know was tested. And I don't necessarily care who ends up doing it, but the product should be tested for sure but it shouldn't be the state shouldn't have their hands in this portion of it.
That's just expecting the customer. That's putting too much responsibility on the customer, and the customer can't know everything about everything that they're buying. And we expect to be able to interact with products in our world that aren't going to kill us outright. So just like, what if a customer doesn't even know? What if we need to test our grapefruit and you don't know that? I mean, did you demand that your grapefruit was tested? Like, it doesn't turn out that it's actually dangerous. Customers may not even be aware that there's products that might be used on cannabis that could be dangerous for them to consume. A lot of customers don't know that. So demanding that the customers have to insist on paying more to defend themselves against something that they don't even know is a problem. I just see a whole lot of people trying to save money hurting themselves in that scenario. And that's exactly why we sort of set up these testing things in the first place as society, to make sure that industry doesn't end up poisoning people to make a quick buck.
So I agree with you. I agree with you in that it's the one place that the consumer is better off in all of this, because the consumer gets screwed in every other way in this entire process except for this one thing. The testing is beneficial for the consumer, but I mean, I see it in the trap. I see it in the trap. I see people getting products tested. I see consumers wanting to know that it was tested or wanting to see.
But they didn't before the legal market existed. Man, when I was in Humboldt, nobody talked about testing. I mean, and that was only something that existed because consumers have become more educated about what is actually going on in cannabis cultivation, and that some of that stuff could harm us. And we learned about that through sort of the legalization process and a lot of that stuff coming to light. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think most of this stuff has become worse for consumers, but that, I mean, I think back to what I probably was smoking, stuff grown with Eagle 20 and other things that
Avid, Eagle 20, Floramite. I mean,
right.
We're just waiting on a list.
I didn't know any better.
You know,
I think some people would argue, like,
Yeah.
where are the deaths from cannabis? Even the Eagle 20 stuff, like, where are all the people that are dying? I've seen a few cases of people that were
Those
compromised
are
immune
acute
system.
toxicity. Pesticide
smoking.
toxicity is almost always chronic toxicity that gets you over time.
So it is bad, and I'm against it. But like, we have tainted romaine lettuce that killed 5 people in the last year, and 35 more were injured by.
Right.
So
Yeah,
everything needs to have.
It's true that your food products are go against way less high, like much lower standards than your cannabis does.
For heavy
Even though you
metals,
probably,
for molds,
the average
for everything.
person may consume a few grams a week or something, whereas you're eating lettuce, however much you're eating lettuce. So I think you could argue that food is less safe for you than cannabis. But I think when this was all being put together, like, that mentality wasn't really good enough. So I think that's why the state of California really latched in. And, at the time they were pushing the limits of science for this testing. There weren't standards for how this testing was supposed to be done, to the point where companies had to come up with it on their own and then prove their methodology to a private board or whoever. I don't understand that whole part of it, but I think I got the first part right. So,
yeah,
and also,
I agree with you. And I certainly agree that there's a whole bunch of testing that probably doesn't need to be done at all, that doesn't benefit the consumer at all. And there's a whole lot of regulations related to how growers can operate that don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, and ban products that shouldn't be banned and other things like that. I absolutely think that cannabis should be treated like every other crop. But a lot of crops need kind of fairly close inspection to make sure that they're actually safe for the end consumer.
And perennial cynic that I am, why would I believe anyone that is doing their own testing? Why? Why would I care? Why would I think that somebody isn't going to be duplicitous? Maybe I have been wronged too many times in my life, but it only has to happen once, right? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you.
Well,
right?
I got
So
E. coli from Chipotle, so I know. That's why I'm hyper aware of, like, getting injured or ill from food. It happens, and it is unfortunate for the consumer. It's hard to avoid because you assume these places that have like an A health standard are going to serve you safe food. And so same with like cannabis. I got mold out of a legal bag that was tested for mold and mildews, but it was like 1 out of the 1,000 bags that I've come across from the legal market, where probably in the illicit market, it was probably maybe 1 in 100 or 1 in 50 or something like that, or maybe it wasn't as high. I don't know. It just depends.
Mold's just a visual inspection thing, anyways. The visual, unless it's got debris on it over like 25%, that it doesn't fail anything anyway. So it doesn't really protect you when it comes back to mold. And then
that's why I visually inspect it myself now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. crack it open. Yeah, for sure.
And I have a little
Or how
scope.
about
I have a little jeweler's loop that I like hover around. I like to look at the trichomes anyway, so it's like a dual purpose. I look at the trikes to see
Nice.
like, was this picked early? Was this picked like on time? And my guess, or if it even matters, I'm just curious because if it's gonna be
Yeah.
really zippy and uplifting, like real clear trikes that I don't see too often, I'm gonna avoid smoking that like right before bed is really the main thing. But also like my wife is hypersensitive to smoking PM. She got really sick one time, and
Yeah.
Matthew and I tried it, didn't really impact us
I had
much.
no effect that I could
And
tell, that I
yeah,
felt.
I didn't feel any effect either, but she had a headache for like multiple days and vomit several times. So it is something to be aware of and definitely investigate for. So I have a kind of change of topic a little bit because being in the area that you're in, I think it's pretty known for this particular old school strain. And a lot of people I think are on the hunt for it with very little success. Some people here and there claim that they've
Mhm.
got it, but the illustrious, mysterious skunk. Do you have any thoughts on skunky smelling stuff like
Oh.
roadkill, RKS, or just skunk spray, skunky strains? Do you have any thoughts or leads on that? Is it still around Humboldt? Because I found some sour diesel up there the last time I went that blew me away. I was like, this sour doesn't exist anymore. And then I found it. I was like, oh shit, you just got to go up to Humboldt or Santa Rosa to get some. But thoughts on
That's a
skunk?
good question. I haven't seen any of like well, I mean, I see skunk crosses once in a while. Those are still around, even though a lot of that stuff fell out of fashion more than 10 years ago. But I would say it's fallen out of fashion is the biggest issue, or the reason why you don't see it. I would say, um, but not so much. No, the answer is I don't really see much skunk. I see skunky things crossed with skunk, but not really straight up. I do have an affinity for those older things. I like those older strains. And when I had romanticized in the early days about doing a cool breeding program, it incorporated a lot of that stuff. Um, but yeah, no, the answer is not on no on the skunk at this point.
Have you ever messed around with breeding? Speaking of, do you even do it as a
I
hobby or passionately?
I messed around a little bit in the early days, but my hope was that I would be able to build a cool facility here, where I'd be able to do all that stuff. And things kind of tanked before that ever happened.
There's so many other things on the agenda. I'm sure just trying to, like you said, keep it afloat. And I think you were smart to go into processing because, like we talked about earlier, a lot of the just growers are not renewing the licenses, and I think that you have to diversify and getting a little bit better margins out of the concentrates and things like that, and just more control over the quality of your product from start to finish is a big advantage I think that you had there.
Yeah, I started out as an ice cream company originally. It was cannabis infused ice cream and some other fun edibles like a little microwave cake. You just throw your own egg and your own oil. You throw your own egg and your own milk in it, and it comes with a little packet of medicated. I had all these great ideas early on, and
I think
then
that's a really cool
California.
idea. Before you
Thank
I
you.
wanted to interrupt you to say before I got the chance to, those are really innovative.
Yeah,
I mean, I know I see
Thank
other
you.
people do that, but like, I don't know. I just wanted to say that. Continue.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was cool. It was a really cool passion project of mine. And California changed the regulations, and they wouldn't allow us to put any custards, anything that had to be held at temperature. So that sort of messed things up. And then rosin just kind of like happened, and then rosin took off, and it's still, I think it's the final battleground in California as far as manufactured products. um and I don't think the price can do what BHO did to us, because of how the material has to be handled and harvested from start to finish. With BHO, quality does not matter much at all. I mean, there is nice BHO. I won't talk bad about all BHO because there is good BHO out there. So that those of your listeners that hear that don't think I'm a total jerk. But so there is good BHO out there, but what most processors are doing is using garbage material, molded material, heavily downy and powdered mildewed material, things like that. And that you can't do that with solventless. You have to use decent material to end up with nice hash, to end up with nice rosin. And So I do think that rosin, just happenstance, it kind of just ended up this way. I mean, it's an incredibly low barrier for entry financially to get into rosin. You get yourself some bags and an AC unit with a cool bot in a small room, and you get your space, nice low temperature. You get yourself a little press from low temp. You can be making rosin for 10 G's or something like that if you play your cards right. BHO, you can't do that. You know, the permitting for that type of license is also significantly cheaper than BHO, and just, you know, all the fire regulation and pods and all the things you have to be able to manufacture BHO, or it just becomes prohibitively expensive to get into that. And I think that yeah, so I think that rosin just happened for me, and I think it's a great place for all growers to think about going with their products at this point in all markets, because I believe that if growers truly do, like, growers decide to be washers, we can stop worrying about other people washing our material. We can stop worrying about them lying about yields and them not paying us. I mean, it's just that next step that growers, I feel, need to take at this point.
A lot of them were taking half. That was the standard for a while. Like, if I wash your material, I'll take half. And people were just
Yeah.
accepting that. And like, holy shit,
Yep.
to lose half your product for somebody
Yeah.
else just to do a couple hours of elbow grease. Hard ass
Yeah,
work.
I mean,
but
and hash making, you know, the detail, it's one of those beauty and simplicity things when it comes to making live rosin. It's beautifully simple and beautifully complex at the same time. It's like making a perfect French omelet or something, you know, to compare it to food, which I do a lot. On the surface, you take some material, you wash it at cold temperatures, you freeze dry it, you press it. But you know, what's the temperature of your water? How was that material treated? How was it harvested? What was it grown with? All the way to how, you know, how long did you freeze dry it? Did you over freeze dry it? Did you treat it well once you took it out of the freeze dryer? Did it stay cold? Did it heat up to room temp? How did you store it? Was it in a jar or in a plastic bag? And then how did you press it? You know, how long did you press it? Did it get off the plate quickly enough? You know, what was your ambient temperature, you know, the room sat at while the hash sat out until you collected it? How long did it sit out before you collected it? I mean, there's just so many, there's like a million more details.
do you whip it? Do you not whip it?
Yeah. Do you batter it or not? My personal feeling is that fresh press is an unfinished product. I believe that not cold curing your rosin is kind of like not barrel aging or not bottle aging your wine. I think cold cure is that's a full sensory experience. The terpenes are available, and you're able to kind of absorb that experience a lot more in a more pure manner than with fresh press. I think it's easier to consume. You just kind of swipe out a little chunk. Fresh press, you got to kind of wait for it to come up to temperature, but don't let it sit out too long. And if it's out too long, and it starts to batter up. I think that the fresh press market is a very specific group of connoisseurs that enjoys that product. And I think the fresh press is the purest expression. I mean, it's fresh press. It's just straight off, that's like, how the clarity, like you can look for impurities. I mean, it's the truest form, I think, other than just 6-star melt. But I don't think it's a good consumer product. I don't think it's the way that people want to consume. I think people want to open the jar and be blown back. You know, they want their hair blown back by that amazing combination of terpenes. And then, they want to be able to swoop a little chunk out, dab it quickly, and use it. So, So
I
I don't
agree
know
with you.
why I got
Not
I went on a
ruin it by
tangent
having
there,
it
but
sit for a little too
Yeah,
long, or have to
yeah.
baby it in and out of the fridge or freezer, or carry a little cooler
Yeah.
around with you if you're going to go on a hour-long trek,
Same
like
is
a
true
lot
with
of my
water
heady
hash too,
dabbers do.
I
Yeah.
feel the same way as you, Matt. I feel like it's kind of a funny place, right? Because on the one hand, I also agree. I feel like that is very desirable and has a lot of quickly degrading traits that you want to keep around. But at the same time, that's not necessarily what people want to buy, and they want that convenience and that sort of a thing. I think that's something that people overlook, and they think, "Oh, I really like it," or this group of elite people, quote unquote, including everyone on this panel, people who really talk and care about this stuff, they might want it, but the average person might not, which is a kind of a tragedy of the commons, right?
I have a question for you: is consumption side of things. If you make this wonderful product that's so tasty and delicious, like 6-star or fresh press, or even the cold cured rosins, do you go about dabbing them with a cold start? Do you have a hot start or an e-nail at a certain temperature, or do you like an e-rig, like a Puffco or something similar?
So you're gonna think I'm a complete heathen, but I smoke entirely too much hash to have a glass rig all the time. I use a glass rig
Yeah.
like on occasions or if I have something special. But I may go to hell for this, but I'm a Puffco guy.
Oh, you're a real one.
So
I've got two of them, so I can't hate too much.
yeah, me too. And so it's like yeah, it's just I that goes right back to I smoke a lot of hash, man, and I can't constantly be cleaning the slurper or cleaning the bowl. I just have too much time. I just have too much time into it. Like once in a while when I like come home or like, you know, if I have something particularly interesting that I press at the lab or a mix or something, I'll come home and I'll dab fresh press out of the glass rig. And I enjoy it a lot. It also, I mean, I'm, you know, 41, so the glass rig hits me a little harder than it used to also. So
I'll
um
look forward to that.
yeah.
The dabs can definitely be harsh on the lungs. I think if you
Yeah.
take it a little too hot or if it's just a little too terpy, like some terps are more caustic than others. And if it's a high
I
terpene
agree.
concentrate, it can really like make you cough in an uncomfortably, like almost painful exhale. Even if it's a clean concentrate, it's just like that strain produced, like Limarilla, for example, has so much limonene, and limonene in high concentrations it stings my nose. Like I like limey, I like lemony, I like the citrusy stuff, but to a point. If it is too strong, it is like, you know, dabbing pledge or something or pine sol or
Yeah.
something. You know, it's like nobody wants that caustic astringent, you know, paint stripping quality.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a point. And I think you find that more with like people that are doing distillates and then adding terpenes back in and not really sticking to the ratios that we're finding with a plant that you would get when you press it or dry sift it. And yeah, I'm curious if you could just give the people that are listening a little bit of a rundown. Everybody calls their stuff 6-star, but as somebody who's made my own hash, I'll admit not all of my hash is 6-star. But like, what is the difference between a 6-star, 5, 4, 3? And I'm sure people could Google it, but like, just as a hash person, could you give the listeners out there like a rundown of what makes it?
So 6-star is completely bullshit, and it like
Oh, there we
first
go.
one, you know, there's like this shouldn't exist as a way of classifying things. There's nothing scientific about it. It's silly in every regard. I mean, it's if anything, it's like kind of a marketing thing that hash makers use. Like, oh, this is 6-star. Oh, there's no way of classifying 6-star. And some hash maker might get in your comments and be like, oh, well, I smoke it on a metal screen and I weigh the whole thing before I smoke it on the metal screen, and then I weigh it after I smoke it on the metal screen. I just don't think there's any way to like do that in a scientific manner that makes sense to me. I have a background in science, so these things bother me. Um,
Yeah.
as of now, I'm sure there is a way that some amazing hash maker or hash tech guy has figured out. I've heard people just say, when you press your bag, weigh it before, weigh it after, subtract that, get a percentage, and that's what, if you end up with 85% rosin, you got 85% melt. But that doesn't take into account bag saturation. So I just think that there's a window on every press puck where the hash in the center gets stuck in with the parchment paper, and when we collect, we don't use any of that. But that's still like, so where does that fall into this melt category? I mean, a lot of guys will say flag it out. So flag out the hash, make a little chunk, press in between parchment paper, let it get nice and warm. I mean, like, you guys know all this stuff. Cut it with a tool, take your flag, dab your flag, and then it's just completely based on what you think. Did it melt as much as you expected it to? Did it completely melt? I mean, I don't even. And then people say, okay, well, what's left in the banger? But the best water hash I've ever smoked still got funky in the banger on. Like, you still can't reheat it. So it's I don't really know. I don't know how. I definitely know what, to me, 6-star hash is. Like,
What's
but
one star?
I don't know
Qualitative.
how everyone.
It's
One
just your
star.
qualitative assessment then.
1-star might be like food grade or something. Like
Green, doesn't burn, doesn't melt.
Green doesn't
doesn't
burn.
burn, like, leaves like just a lot of particulate, a ton of particulate in that bowl. I think as you move forward, there would be like less and less particulate in that bowl.
I agree with
Um,
that.
but again, I think it's really, really difficult without some sort of equipment that not every dabber is going to have to assess your melt category or your star rating, whatever you want to call it. Again, I'm sure there's some genius out there that's figured out something I'm unaware of, but from my humble opinion, 6-star is sort of a ridiculous thing to call out. I mean, you can flag it out and show a picture of it. And if it's, nice and clear, and if you look really close at it, there's no particulate. I mean, it's really hard to get all that particulate out of there or not end up with any of that. You kind of need a pretty fresh bag set, a nice light wash, maybe first or second, you just kind of turned it in there, like, it's kind of difficult. And then, a lot of guys will see more, you'll end up with more of a higher melt, I think, off of more mature trichomes. And I think that's sort of something people, may not really understand, is that the guys that have the best melt are really getting that off of like 120 through 150, maybe 90 through 150 or something like that. So
Less about head size, more about resin maturity.
Yeah, I think so. Strain specific, resin maturity, and then your ability to keep contaminants out of that hash through the wash process, which is, where the art of it comes in, I think.
And then
whether or not to
my stuff has contaminants.
Whether or not to air dry or freeze dry. If you're going for the purest, best form of melt, I think if you're just going for water hash, I think that air dried is really the way to go. I think a freeze dryer takes away a lot of the amazing qualities that the hash has to offer in that case. I think if air dry was a more like doable process, like if it didn't take up so much space and so much time, I think that you would see it in the rec market. But like personally, I know of one guy out here that produces it, and he makes like super small amount of it, and it's impossible to get.
Is it Nasha or somebody else?
No, it's air dry or dye.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know Nasha does some of the
Great.
more like Frenchy cannoli style stuff, and there's a couple groups that are going with the more old school style hash, but I don't think that many of them are air drying. A lot of them are freeze drying, and something on the thought of that is maybe terpenes that are water soluble that would homogenize in the hash throughout an air dry, like into the leftover material, are potentially being sucked out in that little exhaust pipe. Because I can smell the terpenes in the water, the esters, the aldehydes, the ketones, the other stuff when I wash. Certain strains definitely, like you see anthocyanin in the water, it's purple. So it's not gonna, sometimes the resin is actually purple, but oftentimes like the water will be purple and then the resin comes out gold. And so there's like weird little oddities like that. And the stuff that I'm smelling in the water, a lot of people like water it back into their plants. Abolished Farms, I think, makes like a Kool-Aid, boiling it down and adding some stuff back into it and infusing it. But I definitely think that there's something that is being removed in the water, and usually terpenes and other aromatic kind of elements.
Yeah, we lose a lot of monoterpenes in the wash process and in the drying process. I mean, there are companies that I know of that are extracting the terpenes from the water out of the back of the freeze dryer, and then using that to wet down their products or do mixes or all kinds of different things, adding it back to THCA and things like that. So that's why there are people who really like BHO for that reason, because it does hit different when you're not getting actual BHO also. But I mean, like, you get those monoterpenes in BHO that you don't get in water hash.
For Groley in Michigan is known for like his lime skunk work and a lot of citrusy stuff that comes through really well. I think he also has some clementine and other BHO that people rave about there, and he does it really clean and has like 0 part per million in his testing after it's all done and everything like that. So there are people that do it right with good material. He grows his own and processes his own. So I've only heard good stuff about him, and I've had a couple good things out here in the BHO side of the market, but I do typically prefer the hash side of things, even though it tends to be a lot more expensive. The yields and returns are a lot lower. And just a quick thing I found on Where's Weed for the people out there, because I needed a refresher on this too, because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. 5 to 6 star, they categorize as full melt hash. So like when you smoke it, like he was talking about, some people talk about the screen, weighing the screen. You put it on a metal screen and smoke it. If it melts all the way through, that's usually a good sign that it's 5 or 6 star. Versus like 3 to 4 star, they're saying is sometimes called half melt, where when you smoke the stuff on a bowl or whatever, or on a screen, you're going to have some sort of like charred material left over. So it's either lipids or plant material. Like if I wash my stuff too long and I look at it with a microscope, I'll see tiny little bits of like leaf tips from, if I do trim run, especially. And they're really microscopic, like grain of sand size little pieces of like dark green material. And Frenchy Cannoli was a big advocate for using almost like a pressure wash water. I know you see a lot of people now with like hoses when they run it through the bag, and that is actually, your resin is about, let's say 90 microns, and then they're blowing that water through, trying to push the smaller stuff that is contaminants through. So if there's dust or other plant particles and things like that, it actually helps clean it up in that process. But I'm curious, Matthew, if you've tried dry sifting at all, because I used to do a lot of water hash myself, but I've gone more to the dry sift side of things. Even though it's even less yield, I feel it can get more of the full terpene and aromatic profile.
With cured material or with live material?
I've only really tried with cured material because the live
Yeah.
material is so sticky. I once tried to
Yeah.
do the, what's it called when you charas. I tried to make charas
Yeah.
with my live material, and you need, at least from my not like experience with it, a lot more than an indoor small home grow to do that. I think it's more like, in India, they're walking up the mountain and collecting it while there's like dew in the morning
Yeah.
and things like that on the best 100
Yeah.
plants, and they just ghost their hand over it one time. I was like basically ripping my plant, like jerking my plant off up and down, trying to strip the resin off, and like barely got the tiniest little fucking chara. So I wasted a few stalks trying to make a chara at home, and realized that wasn't the method for me. But dry sifting cured material seems to work pretty well. Even if like you just have like a trim bin, a lot of people have like that 150 micron. And if you clean that up a little bit, there's like the paint roller technique where you put a little parchment paper around a paint roller and get all static, and you have your mess over here and then the good stuff over there, and then you brush it off. That can get pretty close to like what some would call like 99% just clean heads. And at that point, I'd say you're close to that 6-star, if not 5-star hash.
Yeah, the first hash I ever made was on a screen from cured material, and yeah, we just used to make like little keef blocks. I never pressed any of it because I wasn't making rosin back in that time period. And I think it's a great way to purpose your trim, especially like for a smaller grow. Just like utilize every little thing. If you don't feel like washing it and don't want to have to try to, I mean, having a freeze dryer is a pretty big barrier to doing live rosin. So if you trimming up your buds and you wanted to just sift it, I think that's a great way to do it. Sift as like sift rosin hasn't really done well in the market. I know that there are producers that make a good amount of cured hash. I just don't know who they sell it to. So yeah, I think it's a great way to make cured hash.
One thing that's kind of like an obscure reference, but if anybody out there works with people that are overcoming addiction, like I've worked with people that got over heroin use by using cannabis. And one of the almost relapse or difficult times was I was a big bubble hash guy. And I guess I didn't know this, as I've never used black tar heroin, but like the way that black tar heroin is smoked, I guess some of the textures and like bubbling, melting nature and smoking nature of it were similar. So dry sift was much better for that person because it didn't evoke sort of the same texture and then smoked reaction. So it was just kind of a unique random thing, and part of the reason for certain people that I work with that I went more towards the dry sift side of things, and then ended up secondarily realizing like, oh, I'm actually getting more similar to like my terp profile of my cured flower. Definitely not like the live plant. I think the fresh frozen, in my experience, like washed stuff that's made into rosin can almost smell just like the live plant, or BHO can be really close to like that live plant smell. But as far as like getting close to the cured bud smell, I think that the dry sift is a little bit more similar, and naturally, I guess it would make some sense because it's just coming off of the buds. And a lot of people think that we're just resin farmers, but I always seem to go back to flower. I don't know if you still smoke flower at all. A lot of concentrate people move to concentrate only. Do you still like smoke joints or bowls or anything like that, or you just all concentrate?
Once in a while, I'll smoke a joint, usually like a hash hole. I'll consume one of those once in a while. But on the daily basis, no, I don't smoke much flower, and it's just mostly because I don't have it. I have live rosin, so I tend to smoke that more. I used to smoke a lot of joints, and I think as I got older, I definitely started to feel the effects of smoking those a lot. So that's one reason too. I think I definitely feel like I have a heavy chest when I smoke a joint. But I don't get that from dabbing. So yeah, I enjoy flower very much, and I like to look at it. I like to experience different flower that I haven't experienced. But as a daily, like a utilitarian type of stoner that I am, I tend to smoke what's directly around me.
I respect that. And I think a lot of people for health reasons go more towards the concentrate or even edible side of things. RSO is another one that I think a lot of people can consume and get their sort of cannabis fix or need to medication in that way without having to smoke it. And I think concentrate typically is considered vaporization anyway. It's not a smoke. So I would say even doctors for the most part would be more on the front of people being, more into using concentrates or vaporizing. Although I will say cautionary, don't take real hot dabs like I used to back in the early dab days, like fucking 900 degrees off a titanium nail with like,
Agreed.
that stuff actually gets like, if you look into what some of these terpenes turn into at those temperatures, like actually not good for you. So, and I think that's why some of the younger crowd that I have run with for a little while, they like to take these real big, giant 1 gram hot ass dabs. And I hear them coughing like they're like a 40-year-old cigarette smoker sometimes. And I'm like, dude, like what
I
the fuck?
can
Like
agree with that. I've also experienced that.
this is not the healthy thing that it once
Yeah.
was when it was just that plant, But on your side, I think, growing it how you're growing it, processing it how you're processing it, and even consuming it how you're consuming it, it's a different thing. But yeah.
Yeah, we used to do the red hot knives on the, with bubble hash and just like kind of choke it out and take a knee if you had to. I saw lots of people pass out doing that shit.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it's smoke off crystal, folks. Just smoke on crystal, nice crystal. You can get some cheap crystal out there. I don't mean crystal meth. I mean smoke on nice clean crystal or quartz rather. Quartz is what I mean to say. Use quartz, and you can buy some fairly affordable stuff. And just once it gets charred and all weird at the bottom from overheating it and letting it cool, just buy a new one, buy a fresh one.
Yeah.
Titanium is a bad move for a lot of reasons, I think.
Oh yeah, I totally agree, and I'm happy that I've since moved away from that. I thought that's what you were gonna say at the beginning when you're like, I take dabs and I might get some shit for this, and I was like, oh god, if he says titanium nail, but
No,
well, and
no,
then
no.
the other thing I've never finished up the little review of the star rating system. They say on the low end, a 1 to 2 star hash is the least refined. There's lots of leftover plant materials. In some cases, it may be as much as 50% plant material. And like, if you've ever made hash yourself and went with like the Jorge Cervantes method, where he's like, all right, throw it all in there and put on a power drill for 20 minutes and then come back. And if you did that, you'll probably have some of this like food grade material where it's like completely green and doesn't look like any hash that you've ever seen before. It's probably like mostly actually plant material. So 50% or more 1 to 2 star hash. That's what that is. It's not going to melt. It might not even burn. You try to like put a lighter to it and it like turns into this kind of like charcoaly looking nasty thing. It's not going to taste very good, but it will make decent edibles. So that is
Yeah.
one consideration. You can throw it into some edibles. It might not taste great, but they'll probably get you good and high still. So everything has its use. And that's sort of the quick and dirty overview of the star system. As much as it might not be perfect, a lot of people
Yeah, I
reference
mean
it.
it's what we have. I guess it's what we have. I guess maybe I was a little hard on it in the beginning, but it's very subjective. I think is the big issue with it.
I think
And
you're
that's
rightfully
the
harsh.
biggest
It's
problem.
unscientific
Yeah,
in a field that
yeah,
we're
it's
trying to get
very
more
unscientific.
scientific.
I just don't want to upset anybody who loves the 6 star system.
They're passionate. My stuff's all 6 star and I won't be told
Yeah,
any different.
exactly. Yeah,
The other thing is this kind of like, I mean, this is kind of like a Michelin star system is what's sort of aping, right? Are we in agreement to that, or is that not the case? Because that's always the
I
impression
think it's
I
a
had.
little different because at least this, like when I went through that last thing, there's a physical quality, like the melt versus half melt versus no melt. You could say at least there's like a physical indication. And Frenchy
Well,
cannoli,
where did the terminology come from?
I hate to speculate, but
Star
like,
ratings, but I think
yes,
that's actually different than Michelin stars, Matthew. But yeah, it's star rating, like
it's
giving
weird that it's not
5 stars
five
to a movie
stars
or
though,
something.
or 3 stars like a Michelin restaurant would be the top, and then two. Michelin star is funny because it's like Michelin, like the tire company. A lot of people don't know this. It means one
That's
star
true,
is
that's
though.
like
it
You're
is.
I
right.
would drive there
Yeah,
because it's good. 2 stars, like I'm gonna go
yeah,
really far out of my way. 3 stars is like you're
One
gonna make a
star is
vacation.
yeah.
rated restaurant.
Yeah, one
It was
star
a
would be amazing, and that's kind of
Right.
what
Right.
I was
yeah.
alluding to. Is like,
Most restaurants don't
yeah,
have Michelin
That's a good
star.
point.
they're
Yeah, it was
still
actually a
good though,
guide. It was actually a guide that was put together by the Michelin company.
right?
Um, a lot of people don't know that. Yeah.
Well,
But
and
I guess it's like you can still be really good without having a singular one. But here it seems like it's more like a rating, like you know, I give this movie 1 star. Maybe it's
Yeah.
more like that.
it's sort of like
Yeah.
that, but Frenchy cannoli, I think, rest
It's not just a qualitative rating, right? It's not just sort of impressionistic. It's based on some physical criteria is what you're saying, Jack, right?
Yeah, so the melt is the primary thing, and going to a little bit more advanced scoring system, we interviewed him, our former host of the Cheap Home Grow interviewed Frenchy Cannoli, and we talked a little bit about,
cool.
he has this, and he came on here on this actual show, Growing with My Fellow Growers,
Cool.
one of the
That's
episodes,
really
and
neat.
we all got to chat with him and hang out. He's a great dude. Brandon, I think's met him in person. One of my buddies is taking a sash class, but great guy. But something I think that he did that is sort of a service to the community. It's not perfect because there is some sort of like esoteric and out there kind of more spiritual stuff. Was he made this way to evaluate hash called scoring for quality, and there are here are the categories: appearance, body, bouquet or aroma. That's the same category. Complexity / balance, intensity / duration, and then melt is in bold because I should probably be sharing this on my screen, but for whatever reason, Google Chrome has crashed and not letting me pull anything up. So I can just doing it on my phone right now. But the values for those first categories, and I'll go over them again: appearance, body, bouquet, complexity, and intensity. Those are all 10 points. So, it's like out of 10, a 1 through 10. You rate it 1 through 10. But then melt, he gives a higher weight because just like the star rating scale, he felt that melt is a huge importance of the hash quality. So instead of getting 10 points for melt, you rate it 1 through 10, but then you multiply that by 5. So it's 5 times more important, in his opinion, for the total score. So if your stuff has a certain smell, a certain intensity, a certain duration, it gets, a max of 10 points for the smell, a max of 10 points for duration, a max of however many. And if it melts perfectly, it'll get 50 points in the melt category. And then there's a couple more: smoothness, stability, taste, uniqueness / overall pleasure. And then the last part he added more recently was lab results: cannabinoid quantity, cannabinoid spectrum, and terpene content. And those were 20. So they were just multiplied by 2. So you rate them 1 through 10, and whatever that score was, it'd be multiplied by 2. And granted, it's not like perfect because, again, it's like a subjective 1 through 10 scale. But I think if you started to get more specific, like, okay, cannabinoids would be above 50% gets a 8, above 60% gets a 9, above 65% gets a 10, or something like that. And then terpene content would be like 10% is a 10, and like however you want to go about doing it. But at least this gives you a score total out of 200 across all those categories to give you more of like an average, as opposed to saying, oh, this shit's really good, which is
This
a lot
shit
of
is
people's
fire. In fact.
This shit's the fire. This is the dankest thing.
Yeah,
the 6
it's
starriest
hard.
hash.
What we ultimately care about is the qualitative experience of using the hash and sort of what it does to us and how it makes us feel and how we enjoy it and maybe how we see it, how we interact with it. But like, that's what really matters, is the qualitative experience. So I'm almost more tempted to just say we should keep with a qualitative scale. Doing a rubric like that and then creating multipliers and all of this, it can sound good in theory and then produce scores that don't align with kind of your actual experience, which ones you prefer. Like, well, that one gets a higher score, but I actually prefer this other one. I'd rather know which ones
that scale was even to what he prefers. Like, he preferred melt as the highest thing. And
I would cross out uniqueness. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah,
what's a 3-level uniqueness?
Not going to matter to everybody.
100% subjective. It's 100% your experience interpreted through your lens, and then
that's what we want. I want something that like speaks to my experience and what I want.
Well, and some people care more about how it looks. The bag appeal. We eat with our eyes first. People take a picture of their plate before they, eat it at a fancy restaurant or even fucking Chipotle, wherever they go, who knows. But like, and the smell
people
of it,
aren't honest with
breaking it
themselves
up,
about
the
that.
feel of it, the experience. So like, everybody has a different thing that's important to them. For me, as a medical person, I'm like, doc, I think the experience should trump all. I don't care if it melts terribly. If I get a medical
calories and how many grams of fat are in the food sometimes ruins the experience, right? Like, getting too much knowledge about like the technical details sometimes can really take away, I think, from some other aspects of it. I feel the same way about cannabis testing sometimes. Like, if I really like a strain, I don't even want to know what it tests at, because all that could do is sort of make me think lesser of it.
Oh man, buying by THC percentage has been a very negative effect of the consumer having access to this information, which
and what the growers grow in the
have
market,
it, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's it's caused just a clusterfuck of cookies on cookies
Yes.
on
OG.
gelato on. It's just like this has become a really unfortunate scene in that
And a
regard.
lot
People,
of, and I would argue the skunky strain and terpenes that we always ask about have kind of been thrust to the side sometimes in the pursuit of higher THC numbers.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
I want to give Brandon Rust a
100%.
shout out. He had to cut out to go to a family dinner event. So cheers to Brandon Rust.
Right
You can
on.
find his stuff at bokashiearthworks.com. Great dude. At Brandon Rust on social, or Rust.Brandon on social medias. Check him out for sure. And at this point in the show, I typically pass it over to Spartan Grown because he's got to actually cut out and go over to another 2-hour long episode just like this of the Michigan Bros Grow Show with some awesome dudes over there in Michigan. So Spartan, any final thoughts and shout outs? Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Jack. And, shout out to Matthew, first and foremost, for coming out and sharing his experience. But kind of on that same vein, with it's kind of, commercial level, that's large scale farming that's going on right there. And I know that we have a lot of people that listen to this show that are also in the commercial scene. And I just wanted to highlight, we've lost another person in the commercial scene. This is now the second death that I've personally heard of.
That's right.
And this both for the same kind of similar reasons. This was an elderly lady who had COPD, so she already had breathing issues to begin with, and she was in the room where they were packing the joints. And that was what happened with the first person too. There's so much particulate in the air in those rooms. And I think in both cases, neither one was wearing a mask, whether, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. I don't care who is supposed to supply the mask. Go grab one for yourself and wear the mask. I mean, if it could be your life that we're talking about. So please, if you're working in the industry and you're working in these areas, especially pre-roll areas like that, please wear a mask. Other than that, I just want to say, everyone just, it's important, I think, when we're fighting for rights and things like that, is to protect home grow above everything, because if we're all can at least have the ability to grow at home, who cares what happens on the commercial side? Let them do whatever they want to do. As long as we can grow our own, we win. So keep growing. Love you
I
guys.
like that.
Carlos,
I like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Spartan, cheers. Always great to have Spartan on. Just great advocate for the plant, great grower. And I love that he's, taking a little bit to the political side of things and really pushing for what he feels and believes in. And that is a good message. A lot of people, myself included, I'm always skeptical whenever I hear anything negative about cannabis. I'll admit it. When I hear somebody dies in a cannabis workplace, my thought is, okay, how do they actually die? How are they pinning this on cannabis? But when there is stuff like that, particulate matter in the air quality is a real thing. PPE,
COPD
whether
is a pretty significant pre-existing condition though too.
right.
Yeah.
Is this a
The
new?
one lady at the
is this a recent?
Cresco said that she didn't have a pre-existing condition, or the family is claiming that there wasn't a pre-existing condition for the younger woman in the Cresco Labs case. And so I looked into that. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Then I saw it again. And one of the regulatory agencies of the US, I can't remember exactly which one is responsible for workplace OSHA. I think it's OSHA, evaluated this pretty extensively and did come to that conclusion. And not to say that a government agency is like going to 100% come to the right conclusions on everything, but I like to really dig into the science and look into it. And that did seem like what happened.
Yeah.
The claimed story seems, at least from what I have seen and been presented, I tried to look at it as skeptically as possible, but I still come to the same conclusion that OSHA found in that case, where it is likely or very possible that the death was caused by working in that environment and, inhaling enough particulate matter that it caused certain respiratory issues that led to the demise of that individual. And it's tragic. And people, I will say this, die in every industry, like all the time, whether it's like a random heart attack on the job, but we should be protecting people for these things. Like it is important that we do, like Spartan said, even if you're not provided a mask, if you start to feel like, oh, my lungs aren't feeling good, I'm not breathing, like she was reporting a lot of this stuff. Maybe, I hate to say it, like in a tough economy, like quit your job and find something else. That is an option. We're human beings. We have freedoms. So sometimes you got to vote with your feet. But if you can't do that for whatever reason in the moment, like you have kids, you have a family, you have bills, all that other stuff to pay, don the mask. I know people will talk shit and throw signs at you and say it's going to do this or that, but like find one that works for you, that can protect you and give you safety in your workplace, because everybody, I believe, deserves to be safe and healthy in their environment where they work and live.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It should be a basic thing at this point, but unfortunately, it's not the case even in California or all of the 50 states. As much as I'd like to think we're great, we still have a lot of stuff that we can work on.
Yeah, there are dangers in every industry, but it's the owners of those businesses and the industry itself,
Agreed.
regulators, that need to find ways to minimize those risks and those dangers. And it's important that if you're a worker in the industry that you're aware of it. But I hadn't really thought about that prior either, in terms of that being a potential danger. I could certainly see how it could be.
I didn't as much either, but when I reflect on it a little bit, I feel like similar to Dr. Coco here, that like the onus is definitely on the company for providing PPE for all kinds of other things. And dust, or like an industry where dust inhalation and things like this, botanical material, is already a known problem. Come on. Tobacco, all kinds of other stuff, and even things that are not organic. Like, we already know that breathing that in is not great. Obviously, COPD is also not great, but like, you don't know. You're not walking around. I had this conversation multiple times in the past, where it's like, you don't know. You're walking around. You don't have your like, oh, am I sensitive to this meter? Let me just, put it on my skin and see if I'm going to have an acute or a chronic reaction today, or after 25 years, 30 years, 50 years of your life. It adds up. And yeah. So anyways, I also want to echo that sentiment. Like, be safe, but also like, demand better of people who are put in positions to regulate that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know why it wouldn't be mandatory that everybody wears a mask that fits their face properly.
Right.
If not a custom respirator, and people shouldn't have beards, and all these things should be enforced. I don't, and then also I wonder why machinery is being used inside of a closed space that doesn't somehow control the amount of particulate that goes into the room. I don't know if that's just beyond the limitations
That's a
of
good
science,
point.
but I'm wondering why, like, you wouldn't take a generator into a room and burn the generator, because carbon monoxide build up, and and so, like, that makes sense. But like, so why would you be running a machine that creates some sort of an unlivable environment and not have some sort of a filter? It just seems like common sense that there would be. And is this a new recent one? I remember there was a true leave death.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Is that
this is
There's
just
a
very
follow-up, a
fresh.
second one.
This is
older
fresh,
woman.
Yeah.
This is a new true leave death?
No, different organization, but
Okay,
yes, a new
okay.
death.
Okay, got you.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of relates back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of regulation, right? It's actually society's responsibility, and usually it's some government agency that acts in society's interest on this behalf, to make sure that industries are safe. Industries following the free market, their responsibility is to make money. And if you're an industry that voluntarily starts doing things that you don't have to do that cost money, then you end up usually going out of business in these cases.
Yeah.
Really up to society to make sure that industries operate in ways that don't kill their workers. Otherwise, history is full of examples of industries that operated in such a way that just killed their workers.
Yeah,
Somewhat in
incentivize
modern
excellence.
times, they have incentivized. If you pay your workers well and you give them like good health insurance and good things around the office, that they're happier workers and they're more productive workers. Like this guy, he had his company and he said the minimum wage is $70,000 a year, because he found out that was the amount that people were like happily living on. So he made the minimum wage at his thing the happy living wage, and then he ended up making way more money that year and the following year. So his company, as a result of treating his employees better, actually thrived, as opposed to going out of business, even in a difficult, somewhat free market.
Yeah, businesses can make their niche that, but generally at scale, like not every business can follow that path. And
I agree. Like running an extra filter in your trim room, because if the 10 companies that aren't doing it and are paying their employees minimum wage, or are even like taking advantage of agricultural regulations that ship people in from different countries or different parts of the country that are here without documentation, but still allow them to work. Things like that happen in California for not just cannabis agriculture, but all agriculture. And a lot of it doesn't get talked about. So I think it's important that we highlight it's not just cannabis that's got issues, but also these things do happen in cannabis, from like the
And
Chinese
farm
types.
workers often have respiratory illnesses and develop other chronic problems through time for exposure to particulate or pesticides or other things like that. So
Yeah, and we're starting to see the kind of people get a little bit of payback with that. The Roundup lawsuits, big multi-million-dollar lawsuits going against Monsanto, which was for a long time like winning all these lawsuits and saying that it wasn't causing what it is causing. Now starting to see hundreds of millions of dollars being paid out, and some families getting some retribution, but obviously many, many more are impacted that don't get any payouts. I saw one of my families here in California spraying Roundup on their weeds the other day. And I go, are you really spraying Roundup? Like, I was shocked when I saw it.
it's a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And like you said, people just don't know, or they don't care because they don't
What did I
understand like
say?
the
It's
acute.
cheaper than the other ways of doing it. And that's why, you know, people often have to make the economical decision. And so when there's a cheaper option, even if it's a dangerous option, people often don't have the luxury of sort of making the more expensive, safer option.
Yeah,
Well,
if
and
we
they're
make
like-
the dangerous option also the most cheap option, it's not a great move.
They could say 90% of people who use Roundup will get cancer. And then like a certain percentage of people, probably even like people like myself, will be like, maybe I'll just be part of that 10%. You know, like maybe I'll be part of that percent that
Like you
doesn't
can
get it.
choose. Yeah,
I'm resilient. I'm
it's-
resilient. I'm healthy. Otherwise, I exercise. I eat right. The Roundup's not going to get me. You know, but
That's a
realistically, it's like
positivity bias.
it's a genetic dice roll. Some people are more exposed based on, you know, their environmental settings and their genetic backgrounds and things like that. But at this point, we've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and this is usually when I go around the horn and let the panelists do their final thoughts and shout outs. So I'll pass it first to Dr. MJ this evening.
You know, Matthew, it was such, and Matthew schackow.
Thanks. Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
I got it. It's just such a pleasure. I really enjoyed having you on, getting your insight. It was wonderful. So thank you very much for sharing sort of your experience, your stories, all your knowledge, your passion for the plant, and really sort of your thoughtfulness about how you approach it comes across really clearly. And I think everybody benefited from listening to the show today. So I'll just do my shout out that I'm Dr. MJ Coco, and I enjoyed this show.
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Doc, for sure. And then last of our panelists this evening of the regulars is Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I just want to echo great questions, great conversation, not just on hash, but also I think like we always do, we get a little bit into the technical details. And in this case, I think we talked some cool philosophy of business and that kind of thing. But yeah, if you guys are interested, Pestapalooza, very excited to see people in Southern California. You can meet me and Dr. Coco on San Diego at Mighty Hydro. Tickets are on sale. Pestapalooza link will be in chat. Also, LA, if you're in the LA area or close to it, the next day on the 30th, so 29th, 30th. And great talk. Thanks a lot for coming on, Matt.
And with
Thank
that
you.
said, our special guest of this evening, Matthew, thank you so much to Kettle on Smoke for linking us up. I'm really happy that they did. Oftentimes, I actually refuse guests, believe it or not, probably the last 10 who've reached out for one reason or another. It seemed a lot more manufactured and product placement type setups. And this felt a lot more organic. Like you're actually one of us, you're a grower, and you've gone on to sort of live that dream that a lot of people aspire to or are currently pursuing. So we were very happy to have you on the show and kind of explain your pathway, how you got there, and just talk shop with us for a little while. So thank you so much. And any final thoughts and shout outs for you this evening?
No, I appreciate all the kind words. This was kind of my good childhood friend was sort of threw this my direction. I thought, wow, that'd be great. And it's been really fun chatting with you guys. I always say I can chat with cannabis people for hours, and today has been no exception to that. I just would say, yeah, you hit on something there. I am just a guy who liked smoking weed that I grew, and that's what all this began out of. I just wanted to smoke weed that I grew, and it became a hobby and then a career. And while I wouldn't necessarily tell people these days to get into cannabis, and definitely not California commercial cannabis, I would still say if you're passionate about the plant, if you like watching the wind go through the leaves, and you could sit there and spend hours just looking at your plants, whether it's indoors or out, I would say stick with it. And I really liked I liked the other panelists' comments about the home grow. I think that there's nothing more powerful that a cannabis user can do than grow their own cannabis. I know that kind of, you know, might not sell cannabis for me, but I think that the more important message is there, you know. So yeah, so thank you guys. You know, people can reach out to me at Matt Schackow on Instagram, or schackow.humboldt on Instagram, and check out what I'm working on. And yeah, thank you guys. Thank you very much for some nice conversation.
It was really a pleasure having you. And to be honest, if you'd like to come back in the future, give an update, maybe in a month or a few months or whenever, we'd be happy to have you back on in the future to you know, check back in with you, because it was great chatting with you. We like your philosophy, and you were definitely a natural on the panel, fit right in with all of us. And I think it was a great time for everybody. And if anybody's looking for my stuff, I'm sure you all know where to find me already, at Jack Greenstock on Instagram, Jack_Greenstock on Twitter. And my book, 50 Strains of Green, is available on 50strains.com. I'm about to drop 5 packs of the Velvet Punch. Right now, there's currently only 11 packs available, regular seeds for people in the US only. But the 5 packs will be on the website soon this week. The last thing I'll say is I've got a few episodes banked for anybody listening live on the YouTube. You probably don't care too much about this unless you listen to the podcast platform and you're like, Jack, where the hell are those last few episodes? We're only on like 222 on the podcast right now, and this is 224. So I think I've got like 2 or 3 more to upload. And I try not to upload them like one after another, because then, you know, people get overwhelmed. So I'm spacing them out a little bit, and they'll be released over the next few weeks. So with that said, at Jack Greenstock signing out. Thank you all so much for coming, panel. Everybody, the guests, Matthew, this evening, and all the listeners, both live and afterwards. We much appreciate you, and we'll catch you all next time.
Grower love, everyone.
Take care. Stay terpy.